Mental Testing and Intelligence Theory, Early Theorist, History of Psychology, Professor Michael D. Bontwin, California State University, Fresno. Hi, in this unit we're going to look at some of the early theorists that started to figure out what intelligence is as a theoretical concept. We're going to be talking about 4 or 5 individuals here very briefly. One of the unifying things besides their interest in intelligence with these folks is that they were also part of the founders of our field. And you see people especially like Thurstone and Cattell making major contributions to the professionalization of psychology by serving as presidents of the American Psychological Association, help founding important journals in our field, and things like that. So each one of these individuals has done voluminous work, but we're just going to briefly look at their contributions from a historical perspective. Enjoy. James McKeen Cattell was a Wundtian student who did his doctoral thesis under Wundt, studying reaction times to different phenomena. He was a Galtonian and worked in the tradition of the anthropomorphic research and individual differences that Galton at the time favored. One of his students, Whistler, in studying anthropomorphic issues like Galton's ideas of intelligence, found a small but significant correlation between intelligence and academic performance. This essentially started the major movement in looking at intelligence and academic performance. He was an early member of the American Psychological Association, and he is responsible for founding 2 major things: the Psychological Corporation, which is a commercial company that sells psychological test and assessment instruments, and he is the founding editor of the Psychological Review, which is the most prestigious journal in psychology. In terms of our study of intelligence, Cattell coined the term mental test. Somebody had to do it. And he brought a quantitative edge to the developing psychology of the early 20th century. And Cattell had the very laudable goal of wanting to see psychology on the same par as the physical and life sciences, or as I say simply, the other sciences. Our next person in our cast of characters is Charles Spearman. Spearman developed many things. He was highly influenced again by Galton. But what we know Spearman for more than anything else is the notion of little g, or general intelligence. And that's a notion that we all have a general level of intelligence that affects our behavior in significant ways. It's usually mitigated by other variables. And Spearman believed that intelligence for any task consisted of what he called a specific component of intelligence, or it's also been called a task-specific component, and general intelligence. So if you are an experienced woodworker, you've developed some skills working wood, that would fit in with the specific ability to manipulate materials and your general intelligence score to figure out how you might perform on constructing something. He developed the statistical technique of factor analysis, which was to play major roles later both in the study of intelligence testing and in the study of personality. Incidentally, he also has one of the early correlation coefficient named after him, and you may have seen Spearman's rho used before. Stern developed the idea of the intelligence quotient, which is something that we still think about today. William, not Howard Stern. Howard, get out of here. William Stern devised a formula for intelligence that was around for quite a while and fit in with Benet's notions of things. So you have the mental age of an individual, the chronological age of the individual, and then you multiply that by 100 to get the IQ score. So if you look at this, you can see a 10-year-old child with a chronological age of 10 and a mental age of 10 would have 100 or an average IQ score. If a child with a chronological age of 10 was doing the task that a 12-year-old could do, they would have an IQ of 120. So all of those things add up to the intelligence quotient. Stern is also kind of has a soft place in my heart, or good, nice place in my heart, because he believed that during the 20th century, the most important questions were going to be those of personality and intelligence, and looking at individuality and individual differences. Good man. Furthermore, he believed that personality psychology was destined to become the major intellectual problem for psychology during the 20th century. And even though that may not be the case, when you talk to lay people, oftentimes they think of psychology and personality psychology. Our last person in our list of early theorists is L.L. Thurstone. Thurstone was very prolific. You can see that he wrote many books and articles. He was a professor at the University of Chicago, and in his latter years directed the psychometric laboratory at the University of North Carolina. His influences at both those institutions are still felt to this day. He was an early president of APA and the first president of an elite statistical society called the Psychometric Society. Entrance is by membership only. Now, Thurstone was a practical man. His background was electrical engineering, and he changed gears and later decided to become a psychologist. So he brought the rigor of engineering into his form of psychology. And Thurstone primarily employed factor analysis to study psychological problems, especially those of intelligence. He introduced into the field of factor analysis the idea of simple structure, which is a theoretical idea as to how you look for underlying variables in a set of data. His primary contribution to our discussion of intelligence is that he opened the debate between Spearman's little g, or general intelligence, and what Thurstone called primary mental abilities. If you look here, you see some of Thurstone's primary mental abilities. You see that you have stuff that is common to many intelligence tests to this day. Verbal comprehension, word fluency, number facilities, visualization, memory, perceptual speed, and reasoning. All of these are smaller components of intelligence. Here is a picture from one of Thurstone's articles. And you can see at the lowest level on the bottom of the page here. Whoops, let's start at the top. Sorry, got my animation wrong. At the top, we have Spearman's little g. Everyone kind of agrees that if you keep on collapsing different types of intelligence, eventually everything gets subsumed by little g. In the middle, you have Thurstone's primary abilities. In this case, you have spatial, numerical, social, verbal, logic analysis, and causal. In turn, you have subscale scores on intelligence tests, which go down to items and behaviors. So you see that Thurstone contributes a hierarchical model of intelligence. Now, all of these things, as you can see by the paths here, are highly intercorrelated. But we do know that some people are better at spatial things, some people are better at numerical things, and etc. This is primarily one of the reasons Thurstone's work, why we divide things like the SAT and the GRE into verbal and quantitative tasks. In this unit, we've looked at some of the founding theorists in terms of developing theories of intelligence. In the other videos in this unit, you're going to be looking at Alfred Binet's work. He's actually the first person to start developing intellectual tests, but he has his own video. You're going to also be looking at the work of Howard Gardner, who gives us a modern view of intelligence, which goes beyond quantitative and verbal abilities, as well as a few other tidbits as we go through. So hopefully you'll find this unit interesting. Bye now. This has been a We Have Couches video production. Copyright 2020. Professor Michael Botwin. All rights reserved. Bye now.